There comes a quiet, painful moment in a parent's life when the world tilts on its axis. It's the moment you realize the fundamental roles have shifted. For decades, you were the guide, the protector, the emotional center of their world. You sacrificed, you worried, you poured your very essence into raising them. And then, one day, you hear it in their tone, see it in their averted eyes, a subtle dismissal, a hint of impatience, or worse, the chilling feeling that you have become a burden. The sting of disrespect from your own children is a unique and profound hurt that can leave your soul aching. Your first instinct, born from a lifetime of love and a moment of pain, is a powerful one. To get angry, to remind them of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dream you put on hold for their sake. But here is the hard, unvarnished truth. That battle will never be won with anger. In fact, it often pushes them further away, validating their perception of you as reactive rather than respectable. There is, however, a much more effective path. It is not a path of confrontation, but one of quiet transformation. It is a journey that allows you to regain their respect, not by demanding it, but by commanding it through your own dignified presence. Today, we will not just scratch the surface. We will take a deep dive into 6 powerful, life-altering principles that will fundamentally transform how your children see you. This is not about simple tips. This is a complete overhaul of your inner posture. This is the Dignity Protocol, main content 1. The paradox of approval, the power of no longer needing it. One of the most common and self-defeating traps parents fall into as their children become adults is the desperate and often subconscious chase for their approval. You might recognize this insidious pattern in your own behavior. You go out of your way to accommodate their schedules. You say yes when every fiber of your being screams no. You silence your own opinions to keep the peace. You do all this from a place of love, hoping that if you are just helpful enough, just agreeable enough, they will finally grant you the appreciation and respect you crave. But here lies the painful, unbreakable paradox. The more you chase their approval, the less respect you will ever receive. At its core, this dynamic is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of what respect truly is. Respect is not a reward for self-sacrifice. It is a direct result of self-respect. When you are constantly bending over backward, you are sending a clear, albeit unintentional, message. My needs, my feelings, my time, and my boundaries are less important than yours. Once your children internalize this message and it becomes incredibly easy for them to take you for granted. It's not that they are bad people, it's that you have taught them that your personal boundaries are optional. This creates an unhealthy dynamic where you become a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be honored. Consider the story of Margaret. In her younger years, she was a force of nature, a strong, independent woman with a clear voice, firm convictions, and a vibrant social life. But as she entered her late 60s and her children became busy with their own families, a subtle fear of being left out began to creep into her heart. To keep the family together, as she would say, she slowly began to erase herself. She let her children make all the major decisions about holidays, even when their choices conflicted with her own long-held traditions. She rearranged her personal schedule at a moment's notice to babysit or run an errand. Most painfully, she learned to swallow her own opinions during family debates, smiling placidly even when she disagreed, just to avoid any potential conflict. She believed she was being a peacemaker, a noble martyr for the sake of family unity. But what was the actual result? Her children didn't see a peacemaker, they saw a pushover. They stopped asking for her opinion because they knew it would simply mirror their own. They stopped consulting her on important matters. Her once strong voice grew quieter and quieter in family discussions until it was barely a whisper. She had lost her seat at the head of the table, not because they pushed her away, but because she willingly, piece by piece, gave her power away in exchange for a fragile, illusionary peace. If this story resonates with you, know that the path back begins with a radical act of self-possession. The first step to regaining their respect is to stop acting like you are desperate for it. This isn't about becoming cold or unloving. It's about cultivating a quiet, internal strength. How to practice this? Embrace the power of no. Start by practicing saying no to small, low-stakes requests. You don't need a long excuse. A simple, "I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me," or "I won't be able to do that," is a complete sentence. This builds the muscle of self-respect. State your opinion, gently but firmly. In your next family discussion, choose one topic and state your genuine opinion, even if it differs from theirs. You can preface it with, "From my perspective, ... or "The way I see it is ... Do it without apology and without needing them to agree. The goal is not to win the argument, but to reintroduce your voice into the room. Stop over-explaining when you make a decision that is right for you. You do not owe anyone a lengthy explanation. People pleasers often feel the need to justify their boundaries. Resist this urge. Your boundary is valid simply because it is yours. The moment you start acting as if your own time, your own energy, and your own opinions have intrinsic value, a miraculous shift begins to happen. They will be forced to see you differently. Their respect will return, not because you demanded it, but because your own self-respect made it impossible for them to ignore. 2. The dignity of demeanor. Don't argue. Lead by example when you're adult. Child dismisses your opinion with a wave of their hand, talks over you in a conversation, or treats you with a tone of disrespect. The primal urge is to argue back. It's a reflexive impulse born of hurt and a desire to reassert your position. You want to defend yourself, to list your credentials as a parent who has lived and learned, and to demand to be heard. But let me share with you a secret that will save you years of frustration and heartache. You can never ever win an argument for respect. It is a battle that is lost the very moment it begins. Think about it logically. When was the last time a heated exchange, a loud argument, or a meticulously crafted logical proof ended with someone genuinely admiring you more? It simply does not happen. Respect isn't won through forceful words or raised voices. It is earned through presence. It is communicated through the quiet dignity with which you carry yourself, especially when your patience is being tested. When you meet their disrespect with your own display of anger, you are simply validating their behavior on a subconscious level. You are engaging in a power struggle on their terms, and in doing so, you confirm their underlying belief that they have the power to rattle you, to control your emotional state. In that moment, you have descended to their level, and from that position, you can never lead. I knew a man named Frank, a beloved high school history teacher, who had commanded a classroom with quiet confidence and profound respect for 40 years. Students revered him, yet at home, his own grown children had begun treating him like an afterthought. They would ignore his advice on finances, roll their eyes at his concerns about their life choices, and sometimes even let out a small, dismissive laugh when he tried to correct them. At first, Frank did what came naturally to a man used to being an authority figure, he argued. He would raise his voice, list the reasons he was right, and try to prove that he was still wise and relevant. But the more he fought, the more they dug in their heels. The dynamic only grew more toxic and painful than one day. Exhausted and utterly defeated after a particularly disrespectful encounter, Frank made a radical change in his strategy. He simply stopped arguing. He abdicated from the war. The next time his son offered a flippant remark, Frank didn't bite. He just looked at him with a calm, steady gaze and said nothing. When his daughter dismissed his concern about her career, he didn't try to convince her. He listened patiently and then simply said, "I hear you." He stopped chasing respect with words and instead began to carry himself like a man who had nothing to prove. Slowly, incredibly, his children started to change. They were used to getting a reaction, to being able to pull him into a fight. When they were met with a wall of quiet, dignified calm, they didn't know what to do. They saw a man who was no longer desperate for their approval. They saw a figure of quiet, unshakable strength. His silence was more powerful than his shouting ever was. How to practice this? Master the art of the pause. When disrespect occurs, do not respond immediately. Take a deep breath. This small act breaks the cycle of reaction and gives you a moment to choose a response rooted in wisdom, not emotion. Use I statements and observations. Instead of accusatory you statements, for example, "You always disrespect me," use observational I statements. For example, "I notice that you're raising your voice," or "I'm feeling dismissed right now." This states the reality without escalating the conflict. Physically embody dignity. Your nonverbal communication is crucial. Stand or sit up straight. Keep your shoulders back. Maintain calm, steady eye contact. Do not cross your arms defensively. Your posture communicates a strength that your words don't have to. If your children disrespect you, do not fight them for it. Show them what respect looks like through your own dignified conduct. Hold your ground with grace, and in time, they will feel its power and follow your lead. Point 3. Emotional independence. Becoming your own anchor. This is one of the most difficult, painful, and necessary lessons a loving parent can learn as they grow older. You cannot depend on your children for your primary emotional fulfillment. You love them deeply, and you naturally want them to love and respect you in return. But there is a crucial difference between wanting their love and needing their love to feel whole. The very moment your children sense that you need them to feel happy, valued, or complete, the power dynamic in the relationship will inevitably shift against you, and respect will begin to erode. Here is a fundamental truth about human nature. People, including your own children, are drawn to and respect those who are emotionally self-sufficient. An emotionally independent person has their own sources of joy, their own sense of purpose, and their own validation. When you rely on your children to be your primary source for these things, you place an immense unspoken pressure on them. Instead of feeling gratitude for your love, they begin to feel burdened by your emotional neediness. It subtly changes the nature of your interactions from a relationship of mutual enjoyment to one of obligation. They may start to pull away. Their phone calls may become less frequent or shorter. They may treat you with a subtle impatience or irritation, not because they don't love you, but because the weight of being your emotional caretaker is too heavy. The more you chase their affection to fill your own emotional void, the less freely they will be able to give it. Helen was a kind-hearted and devoted mother who had poured her entire being into her children. It was her identity. As they grew up and became busy with their own careers and families, she found herself in a state of perpetual, anxious waiting. Her happiness for any given day was often determined by whether one of them called or sent a text. When they didn't, she would call them, her voice often laced with subtle guilt trips. "I was just sitting here all alone, hoping you'd call," or "I miss you so much. I wish you would visit more." She thought she was expressing love, but her children heard it as an obligation. Her calls became a chore on their to-do list, not a welcome connection. Her emotional dependence was, ironically, pushing them away. Then one day, after a particularly lonely weekend where the phone never rang, Helen had a painful epiphany. She realized she had given the keys to her own happiness to her busy children, and it was unfair to them and devastating for her. She decided to do something different. She stopped waiting. She stopped calling first. Instead, she took a deep breath and started to rebuild a life that was her own. She re-enrolled in a community college to take a literature class she'd always been interested in. She reconnected with old friends for weekly lunches. She started taking long walks in the park just for her own pleasure, listening to music she loved. She started building a life that made her happy, completely independent of her children's daily involvement. And a surprising, miraculous thing happened. Her children started calling her more. They weren't calling out of obligation anymore. They were calling out of genuine curiosity. "Mum, how was your class? What are you reading? How was lunch with Susan?" They began to respect her time because they saw that she finally valued it herself. They saw a vibrant, engaged woman, not a lonely mother waiting by the phone. When you show your children that you can stand strong on your own 2 feet, that you are your own emotional anchor, they will begin to respect you not out of duty, but out of genuine admiration for the full and beautiful life you have built for yourself. 4. The art of the boundary, teaching others how to treat you. One of the biggest reasons, and perhaps the hardest for a loving parent to admit, that children lose respect for their parents is simply because their parents let them. If you consistently allow your children to speak to you disrespectfully, to dismiss your feelings, or to treat your time and effort as if they have no value, they will continue to do so. This isn't necessarily because they are malicious people. It's because all human beings, especially within the familiarity of family, will naturally treat you the way you allow yourself to be treated. Your silence in the face of disrespect is not a sign of patience, it is a form of permission. Setting boundaries is one of the most profound acts of It doesn't mean you are starting a war, building walls, or cutting off your children. It simply means you are calmly and firmly deciding what kind of behavior you will and will not accept into your life. More importantly, it means you are prepared to enforce those boundaries with clear, calm consequences when they are crossed. Without enforcement, a boundary is just a suggestion, an empty threat that teaches others your words don't have weight. I remember Robert, a successful businessman, who had run a company with discipline and confidence his entire life. He was used to being respected, but when it came to his adult children, he struggled immensely. They would interrupt him when he was speaking, dismiss his well-earned concerns with a casual wave of the hand, and even openly criticize the way he lived his life. For a long time, he tolerated it. He told himself it wasn't worth the fight, that he was just keeping the peace. But over time, he realized that every time he stayed silent, he was teaching them that their behavior was acceptable. The peace he was keeping was at the direct expense of his own dignity. The day Robert changed his approach was a quiet but seismic turning point. During a family dinner, when his son interrupted him mid-sentence for the third time, Robert didn't get angry. He simply put down his fork, stopped talking, looked at his son, and said calmly, "I will finish my thought when you are ready to listen." The table fell silent. Later that week, when his daughter dismissed an opinion of his with a condescending, "Oh, Dad, that's so old-fashioned," he didn't argue the point. He simply replied, "You don't have to agree with my perspective, but I do expect you to be respectful when I share it." When they continued to push his limits by making less demands on his time, he began to enforce a consequence. He made it clear that if they couldn't treat him with basic respect, he would choose to end the phone call or the visit. At first, they resisted. They were confused and even angered by this new resolve. But Robert didn't back down. They saw that he valued himself enough to demand respect, and because of that, they slowly and surely started to give it to him. If you don't set clear boundaries for your children, they certainly won't set them for you. And if you don't stand up for your own dignity, no one else will. 5. The generosity equation. Stop unappreciated giving. One of the quickest and most certain ways to lose respect in any relationship is to keep giving to people who do not appreciate it. As parents, we are often wired to give. It is a core part of our identity. We give our time, our energy, our financial support, and our emotional labor, often without a second thought. We do it when it's not acknowledged, when it is taken for granted, and even when we are met with a sense of entitlement. But here is the critical, and often painful, truth. When you consistently give to someone who does not appreciate it, you are not building love or respect. You are building expectation. When your generosity is predictable and unconditional, ceases to be seen as a gift. It becomes something they feel they are owed. Your time is no longer a precious gift you are sharing. It becomes an assumption. Your financial help is no longer a lifeline. It becomes a resource they can tap at will. And the moment you are unable or unwilling to give, their response is not gratitude for all you have done in the past. It is inconvenience and annoyance that you are no longer meeting their expectations. This dynamic is a breeding ground for resentment on both sides and a death knell for respect. George was a father who had always been incredibly generous with his adult children. He was their go-to person for everything. He would drop everything to help them with a move, offer financial assistance whenever they hinted at trouble, and rearrange his life to accommodate their needs. But instead of gratitude, he was increasingly met with complaints and further demands. They didn't say thank you for the help. They pointed out what he could have done better or faster when he finally needed their help to clean out his garage after a minor surgery. They were all, predictably, too busy. That was the turning point for George. He realized his endless giving had not earned him respect. It had earned him the role of a doormat. He made a quiet but firm change. He stopped overextending himself. He stopped offering help before it was even asked for. And most importantly, he started saying no when he needed to, without guilt or lengthy apologies. At first, his children were frustrated and confused. They couldn't understand why their ever-reliable resource was suddenly unavailable. But over time, a profound shift occurred. They started to value his time more. They began to appreciate his efforts when he did choose to help. They suddenly realized that his generosity wasn't an unlimited utility. It was a precious gift, not a guarantee. If you feel your children don't respect your kindness, your time, or your effort, take a step back and ask yourself this honest question. What would happen if you stopped giving so freely? When you teach people, including your own children, that your generosity is a gift that is conditional on their respect and appreciation, they will finally start treating I tanned you with the value you both deserve. 6. The vibrant self-building. A life outside of them. Perhaps the most powerful and transformative way to regain your children's respect is to show them, through your vibrant actions, that your happiness, your identity, and your purpose do not revolve solely around them. As parents, it is natural to devote ourselves to our children, to make them the center of our universe, especially when they are young. But as they become independent adults and we enter a new, rich phase of our own lives, that dynamic must shift. If you have spent your entire life prioritizing them, they may, subconsciously, start to see you as someone who has nothing else going on. People intrinsically respect those who have their own purpose, their own interests, their own passions, and their own sense of fulfillment. An interesting, engaged person is an inherently respectable person. If your children perceive that you are relying solely on them for your entertainment, your social life, your validation, or your meaning in life, they may start to feel suffocated by that immense responsibility. Worse, they might begin to see you as someone who has no life of their own, which can unintentionally diminish their respect for you as a complete individual. Consider the story of Eleanor, a widow in her late 70s. After her beloved husband passed away, she, understandably, poured all of her considerable energy into the lives of her grown children. She would check in with them constantly. She would offer unsolicited advice about their careers, their parenting, their finances. She expected them to fill the vast emotional and social space her husband had once occupied. But instead of drawing them closer, her intense, singular focus on them began to push them away. They visited less frequently. Their phone calls became shorter and more perfunctory. Elena, in her attempt to cling to them for dear life, felt more alone than ever. With the encouragement of a wise friend, she made a conscious choice to change. It was terrifying at first, but she took a small step. She joined a local book club, something she had wanted to do for years. Then she started traveling on short, weekend trips with other women from her community. She began volunteering at a local hospital, reading to patients. She stopped making her children the absolute center of her world and started the brave work of rebuilding her own. The effect was nothing short of incredible. Her children started reaching out to her more. They were genuinely curious about her life. How was your trip? What book is your club reading now? How was your volunteer shift? They began to see her not just as their lonely, dependent mother, but as Elena, a fascinating, independent woman who was living a full and engaging life. They admired her. They respected her. If your children don't respect you, ask yourself this honest question. Do they see you as a complete, multifaceted person? Or do they see you as someone who is just waiting by the phone for their attention? When you show them that you are living, not just existing, they will start to see you in a completely different and much more respectful light. Conclusion: in the end, respect is not something you can demand from your children. It is not something you can win through arguments or earn through endless sacrifice. It is something you must inspire. It is inspired by the way you carry yourself, the boundaries you set, the emotional independence you cultivate, and the vibrant life you choose to live. If your children have started to treat you with less care and consideration, do not waste your precious energy on anger. Instead, shift your approach. Stop chasing their approval. Lead by dignified example. Become your own emotional anchor. Set and enforce clear boundaries. Stop giving your kindness away when it is not appreciated. And most importantly, build a life that is so full and beautiful that it exists entirely on its own. Outside of them, if you do these things, something incredible will happen. Your children will begin to see you in a new light, not as a parent, waiting for their attention, but as a whole person who commands respect simply by being who they are. And in time, that respect will come back to you not because you demanded it, but because you, through your own actions and both truly and finally earned it. What is one small step you can take this week to begin rebuilding your own life and respecting yourself more? Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to watch our next videos. **